Shadows over the Savannah River. Chapter 1: Shadows of the Past. In the sweltering heat of a late August afternoon, the small town of Savannah lay under a thick blanket of humidity, the air heavy with the scent of magnolias and the distant promise of rain. The town, nestled on the banks of the Savannah River, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to break the oppressive stillness. John Harper, the town's dedicated historian and high school teacher, walked down the dusty main street, his thoughts preoccupied with the latest in a string of unexplained disappearances that had plagued the town for the past month. He adjusted his glasses, wiped the sweat from his brow, and made his way to the library, hoping to find some answers in the dusty old tomes that lined its shelves. The library was a sanctuary from the heat, its cool, dim interior a stark contrast to the blazing sun outside. John greeted Miss Eleanor, the elderly librarian, with a nod and headed straight for the local history section. He had a hunch that the recent disappearances were connected to something much older and darker than anyone in town realized. John pulled out a heavy, leather-bound volume titled Legends and Lore of Savannah, its pages yellowed with age and filled with tales of ghosts, witches, and curses. As he flipped through the pages, one story caught his eye: a legend about a curse placed on the town centuries ago by a vengeful spirit. According to that tale, the spirit of a betrayed woman had sworn to shroud the town in darkness until her thirst for revenge was sated. The tale was chilling, but it seemed too far-fetched to be true. Yet, the more John read, the more he saw parallels between the old legend and the current events. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was some truth to the story, that perhaps the curse was real and was now reawakening. As John delved deeper into the book, he found a description of the cursed woman's burial site, said to be located in a forgotten part of the town cemetery. Determined to uncover the truth, he decided to visit the cemetery that evening, hoping to find some clue that would explain the strange occurrences. Dusk fell, and the town was enveloped in shadows. John made his way to the cemetery, the air growing cooler and the sky turning a deep indigo. The cemetery gates creaked open, and he stepped inside, his footsteps echoing on the gravel path. The headstones stood like silent sentinels, guarding the secrets of the past. John found the neglected corner of the cemetery mentioned in the book, overgrown with ivy and shaded by ancient oaks. As he searched the area, he stumbled upon a weathered gravestone, its inscription barely legible in the fading light. He knelt down and traced the letters with his fingers, feeling a chill run down his spine. The gravestone bore the name Eliza Montgomery, and the date of her death matched the timeline of the curse. John's heart pounded in his chest as he realized he might be standing on the very spot where the curse had been born. He knew he needed to learn more about Eliza and the events that had led to her vengeful wrath. Suddenly, a rustling sound behind him made John jump. He turned around, his eyes straining to see in the growing darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, and John recognized the silhouette of Tom "Hook" Reynolds, the leader of the local gang that had been causing trouble in Savannah for years. Well, what do we have here?" Tom sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "Digging up old bones, are we, Harper?" John stood up, trying to keep his composure. "I'm just doing some research, Tom. Nothing that concerns you." Tom stepped closer, his gang members fanning out behind him. "Everything in this town concerns me, Harper, especially when it involves nosy teachers poking their heads where they don't belong." John felt a surge of fear but stood his ground. "You don't understand, Tom. There's something happening in this town, something dark and dangerous. People are disappearing, and I think it's connected to this grave." Tom laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Ghost stories and curses. You've been reading too many fairy tales, Harper, but I'll tell you what, we'll let you go this time. Just remember, stay out of our way, or you'll be the next one to disappear." With that, Tom and his gang melted back into the shadows, leaving John alone in the cemetery. He knew he had to be careful, but he couldn't let the threat deter him. The lives of the townspeople were at stake, and he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As John left the cemetery, The moon rose high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the town. The shadows seemed to lengthen and deepen, whispering secrets of a forgotten past. John couldn't shake the feeling that the curse was real and that time was running out. He needed to find a way to break the curse before the darkness consumed them all. Chapter 2: The Legend of the Curse. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of John Harper's study, casting delicate patterns of light and shadow across the room. John sat at his desk, the ancient book of legends open before him. He had spent the night poring over its pages, trying to piece together the story of Eliza Montgomery and the curse that had supposedly doomed the town of Savannah. He rubbed his tired eyes and took a sip of cold coffee, the bitter taste grounding him in the present. His thoughts were still swirling with the events of the previous night, ominous encounter with Tom "Hook" Reynolds, and the unsettling realization that the curse might be real. He knew he had to dig deeper into the town's history to uncover the truth behind the legend. John decided to visit the town's historical society, a small but meticulously maintained archive housed in an old brick building near the town square. Miss Eleanor had often spoken of the treasures hidden in its dusty files and forgotten records. If there was any place that could provide more information about Eliza Montgomery, it would be there. As John walked through the quiet streets of Savannah, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was being watched. The town seemed different in the harsh light of day, less oppressive, but still tinged with an air of unease. The locals went about their business, but there was a tension in their movements, as if they sensed the growing darkness. The Historical Society's front door creaked as John pushed it open. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old paper and varnish. Shelves lined the walls, filled with neatly labeled boxes and binders. At the back of the room, an elderly man with a shock of white hair and round spectacles was hunched over a desk, sorting through a pile of documents. "Mr. Thompson," John called softly, not wanting to startle him. The old man looked up, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Ah, Mr. Harper, what brings you here today?" John smiled and approached the desk. "I'm hoping you can help me find some information about a woman named Eliza Montgomery. She lived in Savannah a few centuries ago, and there's a legend that she cursed the town." Mr. Thompson's expression grew serious. "Eliza Montgomery, you say? That's a name I haven't heard in many years. There are stories, of course, but few concrete records. Still, if anyone has anything on her, it'll be us." The two men spent the next few hours sifting through old records, yellowed letters, and fragile photographs. It was slow, meticulous work, but John felt a thrill each time they uncovered a new piece of the puzzle. Finally, they found what they were looking for: an old diary, its leather cover cracked and brittle with age. "This belonged to Eliza herself," Mr. Thompson said reverently. "It was donated to the society by one of her descendants many years ago. Few have ever read it." John's hands trembled slightly as he opened the diary. The handwriting was elegant but faded, the ink almost too light to read in places. He carefully turned the pages, his eyes scanning the words, piecing together the story of a young woman, wronged and driven to desperate measures. Eliza Montgomery had been a healer, a woman of great knowledge and power, living on the outskirts of Savannah in the late 1600s. She was respected and feared by the townspeople, many of whom sought her help in times of need but whispered about her behind closed doors. When a series of tragedies struck the town, failed crops, sick children, mysterious deaths, people turned on Eliza, accusing her of witchcraft. The diary detailed the horror of those days, the fear and anger of the townsfolk, and the cruel injustice that followed. Eliza was dragged from her home, beaten, and condemned to die. Before she drew her last breath, she swore vengeance on those who had wronged her, vowing that her spirit would return to exact retribution on the town and its descendants. As John read the final, chilling entries, he felt a cold dread settle over him. The pieces were falling into place: strange occurrences, the disappearances, the sense of impending doom. It all pointed back to Eliza's curse, a curse that had lain dormant for centuries but was now reawakening with terrifying force. He closed the diary and looked at Mr. Thompson, who was watching him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Thank you for your help," John said quietly. "I think I understand now what we're dealing with." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Be careful, John. If the stories are true, this curse won't be easy to break, but knowing its origins is the first step." John left the Historical Society with a heavy heart, his mind racing with thoughts of Eliza Montgomery and the dark legacy she had left behind. He needed to find a way to break the curse before it consumed the town. But where to start? As he walked back towards his house, he saw a familiar face leaning against a lamppost. Sensing an opportunity, he approached cautiously. "Sally, wait," John called out, recognizing one of the younger members of Tom's gang. Sally turned, her expression wary but curious. "What do you want, Harper?" "I need to talk to you about something important," John said, his voice steady. "It concerns all of us, including your friends." Sally's eyes narrowed, but she didn't walk away. "All right, Ta." John took a deep breath. "There's a curse on this town, a curse that's starting to take lives. I have reason to believe it's connected to some recent events, and I think it might be tied to something you and your friends are involved in." Sally looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll listen, but you better have a damn good explanation." As they walked together towards the outskirts of town, John felt a flicker of hope. If he could convince even one member of the gang to help him, they might stand a chance against the darkness threatening to engulf Savannah. The shadows of the past were closing in, but John Harper was determined to bring them into the light. Chapter 3. Darkness deepens. The days in Savannah grew shorter, and the nights lengthened, casting a pall over the town. John Harper felt the weight of the legend pressing down on him, the urgency to uncover the truth growing stronger with each passing moment. The sense of unease that had settled over the town like a thick fog seemed to deepen, and the strange occurrences became more frequent and disturbing. One crisp autumn evening, John found himself at the edge of town, standing in front of a dilapidated mansion that had once been the pride of Savannah. It was a crumbling relic of the past, its windows boarded up and its garden overgrown with weeds. This was the old Montgomery estate, the place where Eliza had lived and, according to legend, cast her final curse. John pushed open the creaking gate and made his way up the weed-choked path. The air was still, and the only sound was the crunch of his footsteps on the gravel. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes were following his every move. He reached the front door, its paint peeling and its wood splintered, and hesitated for a moment before knocking. The sound echoed through the empty house, but there was no answer. Taking a deep breath, John pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the beams of moonlight that filtered through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. John pulled out a flashlight and swept its beam across the room, revealing tattered furniture and cobweb-covered portraits. He began his search, looking for anything that might provide a clue to breaking the curse. As he moved through the house, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that seemed to seep from the very walls. It was as if the house itself was alive, watching and waiting. In a small study at the back of the house, John found an old desk, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. He opened the drawers one by one, finding nothing but old papers and broken quills. Just as he was about to give up, his flashlight beam caught the edge of a hidden compartment at the back of the bottom drawer. With trembling hands, he pried the compartment open and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. The cover was embossed with the initials E.M. Eliza Montgomery. John's heart raced as he opened the journal and began to read. The journal contained Eliza's personal thoughts and reflections, written in a delicate, flowing script. It detailed her life in Savannah, her work as a healer, and the growing suspicion and fear that had turned the townspeople against her. But as John read further, the entries took a darker turn, filled with anger and bitterness. The final entries were almost incoherent, written in a frenzy of rage and despair. Eliza described how she had been falsely accused of witchcraft, dragged from her home, and condemned to die. In her last moments, she had called upon ancient, dark forces, vowing to curse the town and its descendants for eternity. John's hands shook as he read the final words. They will pay for what they have done. Their blood will be on their hands, and their souls will be mine. He closed the journal and Saturday back, trying to process what he had just read. The curse was real, and it was more powerful than he had ever imagined. But the journal also hinted at a way to break the cursey ritual that Eliza had described in fragments, scattered throughout the pages. As John left the mansion, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him, he saw Sally waiting for him at the gate. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. "Dan," she said, her voice trembling, "you need to come with me, something's happened." John followed her through the dark streets of Savannah, his mind racing with thoughts of the curse and the ritual. They arrived at a small, run-down house on the outskirts of town, where a group of townspeople had gathered, their faces etched with fear and desperation. Inside, lying on a makeshift bed, was Tom "Hook" Reynolds. His body was covered in strange, pulsating shadows, his eyes wide with terror. He looked up as John entered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Harper, you were right," Tom gasped. "The curse, it's real. You have to stop it." John knelt beside him, feeling a surge of determination. "I will, Tom, but I need your help. We all need to work together to break this curse before it's too late." Tom nodded weakly, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Whatever it takes, just stop this, before it takes us all." As John looked around the room at the frightened faces of the townspeople, he realized that the curse had brought them together in a way that nothing else could. They were united by their fear, but also by their hope that they could overcome the darkness that threatened to consume them. With the journal in hand and the support of the townspeople, John knew that he had a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless to break the curse and save Savannah. That darkness was deepening, but John Harper was determined to bring the light back to his town, no matter the cost. Chapter 4: An Unexpected Ally. The cold autumn night had settled over Savannah, bringing with it an unnatural stillness that seemed to pervade every corner of the town. John Harper stood in his study, staring at the flickering candle on his desk. The shadows cast by the flame danced on the walls, and John couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching him, waiting for him to make a move. The journal of Eliza Montgomery lay open before him, its pages filled with the dark tale of betrayal and vengeance. John had spent the last few days poring over its contents, trying to piece together the ritual that could break the curse. The fragments of information he had found were tantalizing but incomplete. He needed more, and time was running out. A knock on the door startled him, and John looked up to see Sally standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "Dan, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. John nodded and gestured for her to sit. "What is it, Sally?" Sally took a deep breath and began to speak. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the curse and how we need to break it. I believe you, Dan. I believe that this curse is real and that it's tearing this town apart, but there's something you need to know." John leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What is it?" Sally hesitated for a moment before continuing. "There's someone else who might be able to help us, someone who knows more about the dark forces at play here than anyone else. His name is Sam, and he's one of Tom's men, or he was, until recently." John's eyes widened in surprise. "Sam, you mean the guy who used to run with Tom's gang?" Sally nodded. "Yes, but he's different now. He saw what happened to Tom, and it scared him. He's been doing some research of his own, trying to understand what's happening. He thinks he might know a way to help us." John felt a flicker of hope. "Where can I find him?" "He's staying at an old cabin by the river," Sally said. "I'll take you there." The moon hung low in the sky as John and Sally made their way to the cabin. The river's dark waters glistened in the moonlight, and the sound of the water lapping against the shore was almost hypnotic. The cabin came into view, a small, weathered structure nestled among the trees. Sally knocked on the door, and it creaked open to reveal a tall, gaunt man with a haunted look in his eyes. "Sam," he gestured for them to come in, and they stepped inside the dimly lit cabin. "I've been expecting you," Sam said, his voice low and rough. "Sally told me you were looking for answers." John nodded. "Yes, I am. We need to break this curse before it destroys the town." Sam walked over to a cluttered table and picked up a worn, leather-bound book. "I've been studying the curse, trying to find a way to reverse it. Eliza Montgomery's spirit is powerful, but there is a way to break her hold on the town." He opened the book and pointed to a page filled with strange symbols and incantations. "This is the ritual we need to perform. It's dangerous and requires a great deal of strength and courage, but it's our only hope." John studied the symbols, his mind racing. "What do we need to do?" Sam explained the ritual in detail, describing the ingredients they would need and the specific steps they would have to follow. It involved a combination of ancient chants, sacred herbs, and a blood sacrifice. John's stomach churned at the thought, but he knew there was no other way. "We need to gather everything we need and prepare for the ritual," Sam said. "We don't have much time. The curse is growing stronger every day." As they left the cabin, John felt a renewed sense of determination. They had a plan, and they had an ally in Sam. It wasn't much, but it was something. The shadows of the past were closing in, but John was ready to face them head-on. The next few days were a blur of activity. Jen, Sally, and Sam worked tirelessly to gather the ingredients for the ritual. They scoured the town and the surrounding woods, searching for the rare herbs and other items they needed. Each step brought them closer to their goal, but the tension in the air was palpable. The townspeople sensed that something was happening, and their fear grew with each passing day. One evening, as they were preparing for the final steps of the ritual, John received an unexpected visit. Tom Hook Reynolds stood at his doorstep, looking gaunt and haunted. "I heard you're trying to break the curse," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to help." John was taken aback. "Why the change of heart, Tom?" Tom looked down, his expression filled with regret. "I saw what the curse did to me, to my men. I don't want anyone else to suffer like that. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Let me help you." John saw the sincerity in Tom's eyes and nodded. "All right, Tom. We could use all the help we can get." With Tom's help, they finished their preparations. The night of the ritual arrived, and the town was plunged into an eerie silence. The moon was full, casting a ghostly light over the river as John, Sally, Sam, and Tom made their way to the old cemetery where Eliza Montgomery was buried. They gathered around Eliza's grave, the air thick with tension. Sam began the ritual, chanting the ancient incantations and sprinkling the sacred herbs over the grave. John and Sally followed his lead, their voices joining in the chant. Tom stood nearby, watching with a mixture of fear and hope. As the ritual reached its climax, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The air grew cold, and a dark, swirling mist rose from the grave. Eliza's spirit emerged, her eyes burning with anger and hatred. "You dare to challenge me?" she hissed, her voice echoing through the night. John stepped forward, his heart pounding. "We will break this curse, Eliza. We will free this town from your vengeance." Eliza let out a chilling laugh. "You are fools to think you can defeat me. My power is eternal." But John stood his ground, his voice steady. "We have the strength of the living, and we will not be defeated." With a final, desperate effort, they completed the ritual. The dark mist swirled around them, then suddenly dissipated, leaving only silence in its wake. Eliza's spirit let out a final, anguished scream before vanishing into the night. The ground stopped trembling, and the air grew still. The curse had been broken. As they stood in the quiet cemetery, John felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had done it. They had freed Savannah from the darkness that had haunted it for centuries. Tom stepped forward, his expression one of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Dan. You saved us all." John nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "We did it together, Tom. Now we can finally move on." As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the shadows of the past were finally laid to rest. The town of Savannah could now look forward to a brighter future, free from the curse that had haunted it for so long. The ground stopped trembling, and the air grew still. The curse had been broken. The curse was broken, but Savannah was far from peaceful. The aftermath of Eliza Montgomery's vengeance had left the town reeling, and the scars ran deep. The townspeople, once united by fear, now faced a new challenge, rebuilding their lives and their trust in one another. John Harper walked through the streets, observing the damage. The physical destruction was minimal, but the emotional and psychological toll was immense. People whispered in hushed tones, casting nervous glances at every shadow. The sense of dread that had pervaded the town for so long was lifting, but it left behind an unsettling void. Tom "Hook" Reynolds, now a changed man, worked tirelessly to make amends for his past. He organized community efforts to repair homes and clean up the town. His men, once feared, now followed his lead, working alongside the townspeople to restore Savannah. It was a slow, painful process, but there were glimmers of hope. John had become an unlikely hero, and with that came a sense of responsibility. He spent his days helping wherever he could, whether it was fixing a broken fence or lending a sympathetic ear. But the nights were the hardest. Sleep eluded him, haunted by nightmares of Eliza Montgomery and the dark forces they had confronted. One particularly restless night, John found himself back at the old cemetery. The moon was full, casting an eerie light over the gravestones. He stood before Eliza's grave, the place where they had faced their darkest fears and emerged victorious. But something still gnawed at him, a lingering doubt that refused to be silenced. He knelt by the grave, his thoughts a chaotic swirl. The wind rustled the leaves, creating a haunting melody. As he stared at the cold, hard ground, he felt a presence behind him. Turning, he saw Sam approaching, a look of concern on his face. "Couldn't sleep either?" Sam asked, his voice a low murmur. John shook his head. "It's like there's something unfinished, something we missed." Sam nodded, sitting down beside him. "I've been feeling it too. The curse is broken, but the darkness, it's still here, lingering." They sat in silence, the weight of their shared experiences hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Sam spoke again. "There's one more place we haven't looked, that old church." John's eyes widened. The church had been abandoned for years, its doors locked and its windows boarded up. It was a place shrouded in mystery and fear, a relic of a bygone era. "Why the church?" John asked. "Eliza mentioned it in her journal," Sam explained. "She wrote about hiding something there, something important. I think it might be the key to truly ending this." The next day, Sam and Sally stood before the old church. The building loomed before them, its once majestic font now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, but they were determined. With a creak, the heavy door swung open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of decay lingered. They stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The pews were covered in cobwebs, and the stained glass windows were cracked and faded. John led the way, flashlight in hand. They moved cautiously, searching for any sign of what Eliza might have hidden. As they approached the altar, a strange feeling washed over them, a sense of being watched. "There," Sam said, pointing to a trapdoor hidden beneath the altar. "That must be it." With some effort, they pried the door open, revealing a set of stone steps leading down into darkness. The air was colder here, and the sense of unease intensified. They descended slowly, the narrow passageway led into a small, underground chamber. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it lay an ornate, leather-bound book. The cover was embossed with strange symbols, similar to those in Eliza's journal. John reached out to touch it, feeling a surge of energy as his fingers brushed the leather. "This must be it," John said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is what she was hiding." As they opened the book, they found detailed instructions for a final ritual to cleanse the town of any remaining darkness. It was complex and dangerous, but it was their only hope. They gathered the necessary ingredients and prepared for the ritual. The townspeople, still wary but willing to trust in John's leadership, came together to support the effort. They gathered in the town square, the air thick with anticipation. John, Sam, and Sally led the ritual, following the instructions in the book to the letter. The townspeople joined in, their voices rising in a powerful chant. The ground trembled, and a dark mist began to rise, similar to the one they had faced at Eliza's grave. But this time, they were ready. As the ritual reached its climax, the mist swirled around them, then dissipated with a final, anguished wail. The darkness that had lingered over Savannah for so long was finally gone. The town was bathed in a new light, a sense of peace and hope washing over the residents. They had faced their fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged stronger for it. Savannah was reborn, its future brighter than ever. John stood in the town square, surrounded by the people he had come to care for deeply. They had all played a part in breaking the curse and reclaiming their town, and though the shadows of the past would always be a part of Savannah's history, they no longer held power over its future. As the sun set over the river, casting a golden glow over the town, John knew that they had truly won. The curse was broken, and the shadows had been vanquished. Savannah was free at last. As they stood in the quiet cemetery, John felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had done it. They had freed Savannah from the darkness that had haunted it for centuries. Tom stepped forward, his expression one of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, John. You saved us all." Chapter 5, A Town in Turmoil. Chapter 6, Echoes of the Past. The days following the ritual passed in a blur for John Harper. Savannah had been liberated from the curse, yet a lingering unease settled in the air like an unwelcome guest. The townspeople rejoiced outwardly, but John could sense the undercurrent of fear that persisted beneath their smiles and celebrations. Sleep continued to elude him, haunted by visions of Eliza Montgomery's spectral form and the echoing cries of the dark mist dissipating into the night. He wandered the streets at odd hours, seeking solace in the familiar sights of Savannah that now seemed tinged with a strange, unsettling aura. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John found himself drawn to the riverbank where it all began. The waters of the Savannah River flowed gently, reflecting the fading light like liquid gold. He sat on a weathered bench, his thoughts drifting back to the events that had led them here. Sally joined him, her presence a silent comfort in the gathering dusk. They sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wonder if it's really over, John? If we've truly broken the curse?" John sighed, his gaze fixed on the rippling water. "I wish I could say yes, Sally, but something doesn't feel right. There's still echoes, I guess you could call them, whispers from the past." Sally nodded, her expression troubled. "I've been having dreams, John, strange dreams of shadows and voices. I thought once the curse was broken, they would stop." John's heart sank. "Me too, but maybe it's not that simple. Maybe breaking the curse was just the beginning." They sat in silence for a while longer, the weight of their shared uncertainty hanging heavy in the air. The town around them seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. As they made their way back through the quiet streets, they noticed a gathering in the town square. A group of townspeople stood in a circle, their voices hushed as they whispered among themselves. Curiosity piqued, John and Sally approached cautiously, trying to make sense of the murmured conversation. "Strange things happening at the old Montgomery estate," one voice said, barely audible. "I heard footsteps in the attic, but no one was there," another added, fear evident in their tone. John exchanged a glance with Sally. The old mansion had been quiet since their encounter there, but now it seemed the shadows were stirring once more. Could it be that the curse had not been fully exorcised, or was there something else at play, something they had overlooked in their haste to find closure? Determined to uncover the truth, John and Sally made their way to the Montgomery estate under the cover of night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The mansion loomed before them, its windows dark and foreboding. They entered cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that coated the floor. That air was heavy with the scent of decay, and a chill ran down John's spine as they climbed the stairs to the attic. The door creaked open, revealing a room frozen in time. Cobwebs draped the rafters like funeral shrouds, and the air was thick with the musty smell of neglect. But there, in the center of the room, stood a figure bathed in moonlight. It was Tom "Hook" Reynolds, his face drawn and pale, his eyes locked onto theirs, filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "You have to help me," Tom pleaded, his voice hoarse. "It's back. The curse. It's not over." John and Sally exchanged a glance, their hearts sinking. The shadows that had haunted Savannah were not done with them yet.